In this video, I'm going to talk about the second commandment. So let's get started with reading what the second commandment actually says. You shall not invoke the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave unpunished anyone who invokes his name in vain. All right, so to start off with, this one of the things that this commands is that we do not abuse God's name. Um, if if we love God, then we want to do good for God and good for God's creation. But if we don't love God, then we start to it affects our behavior, and we can become um, evil people if we don't love God. Um, and for that reason, we need to not abuse God's name, because if we abuse God's name, it starts to get the idea um, in our heads that God is evil. Um, we must always regard God lovingly. And also, along the same veins, we must always honor our promises made in God's name. On that note, let me read this to you. This is from the book of Matthew, a quote from Jesus. You have heard that it was said to your ancestors, "Do not take a false oath, but make good to the Lord all that you vow." But I say to you, do not swear at all. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more is from the evil one. So why does Jesus say anything more is from the evil one? Well, it's evil when you make promises in God's name, and the way you do that suggests that somehow your ordinary yes or no is not trustworthy, right? You shouldn't be going around saying, um, I make this promise in God's name, as if now that I'm using God's name, my word can be trusted, as if my word couldn't be trusted when I was saying yes or no, in the ordinary sense. And so that's why it's evil. However, if you make a promise in God's name in such a way that it doesn't suggest that your ordinary yes or no is untrustworthy, then in that case it's permissible. An example is when you make promises in God's name in court, or when getting married. Right? These don't treat your ordinary yes or no as untrustworthy. Um, Another thing we have to keep in mind is that when we respect God's name, it also leads to respect of people. If God is loved, his creation is loved. And love of creation leads to love of God. Another point I wanted to make, I wanted to talk about something called prayer therapy. I don't know if you've heard of this concept. The idea in prayer therapy is that you pray, to God. I say to God in quotes, so that we fool our mind into healing itself. In other words, the prayer isn't really directed at God. The prayer is to try to self-heal. And that's called prayer therapy, and that is an abomination and a direct violation of the second commandment, that we should not invoke God's name in vain. Right? Invoking God's name in vain is invoking God's name when in a way where we don't actually expect him to do anything. Right? We're not expecting God to respond. All right, and so prayer therapy can't work, because God's not going to answer that kind of prayer that's not even directed at him. Um, so in the case, let's say you're trying to overcome alcohol addiction, right, and you want to do the 12 steps, then you want to make your prayer real, right? You need to actually have faith. Put your faith in God and seek out an actual miracle, not some sort of self-healing. Um, the second commandment requires us to have faith when we pray. If you recall reading the Gospels about Jesus, how over and over again he would tell people, you've been healed because you have faith. and that comes from the second commandment, the requirement that we put our faith in God when we pray and not pray in vain. So that sums up what I have to say about the second commandment. May God bless you.